Hello, everyone, and welcome to Therapists Supporting Therapists. I am Michelle Lundstrom, and we are here today with the lovely Laura Nydam. She is a licensed independent social worker and a certified alcohol and drug counselor. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad you're doing this. It's helpful.
Well, good. Well, I introduced you a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So as Michelle said, I am a clinical social worker, and I just in the last year started my own business, New Leaf Mental Health Therapy, and that has been going really well. I was kind of scared to take the leap, but I'm actually liking it a lot more than I even knew. But yes, I have a background in substance abuse, and because of that, I also do a lot of trauma work because, as many of you know from working with clients, that usually goes hand in hand. But I also do a lot of other various work. I try to keep things interesting and not do all of the same things. So that's kind of what I do.
Lots of variety and your specialties. Very
Yes,
good.
exactly.
All right. So I've been hearing a lot from therapists about themselves and their clients that they're finding themselves maybe indulging a little bit more with wine or beer, coffee, sugar, other substances. I know I've been craving red wine a little bit more than I usually do. So, what words of wisdom do you have for us as we go through this unique time with the pandemic and working from home and navigating looking at screens and the stress and identifying like when might we be concerned?
Well, just a couple of things about that is like, first of all, I have to realize that because everything is sort of like up in the air, so to speak, all of our, well, not all, but a lot of our normal ways of coping have been sort of taken away from us, not just from our clients, but from us.
Mhm.
And I don't know about all of you out there, but I've been noticing, and I've been talking to some colleagues that have been noticing that, telehealth is helpful for some things, but it does seem for a lot of people to be even more exhausting.
Mhm.
Um, just because for me personally, it's because I'm not in presence of people, and it's easier to attune quickly when somebody is in your presence, and that's harder to do on screen. So if you think about the stressors that are coming at people and that their normal ways of coping aren't there, and then throw on top of that that we're not in our normal routine. So, like a lot of people's habits around substances or alcohol or even food, is that they do more of that when they know they aren't going to work or there's a change in their schedule. And for some people, this is completely different. And because things are all out of routine, it makes it easier to go to coping skills that are maybe not as natural, like drinking more, because you're going to be home in the morning anyway. You're not going to have to get up as early because, for whatever reason, you're not traveling downtown or wherever. And so it kind of plays in your mind differently. And it's also, especially with substances, it's about instant gratification. Like if we're more exhausted because we're so overwhelmed, our ability to cope right there has just it's just more difficult. I don't have to tell you guys this, this, but I'm just reminding you as therapists, to therapists even, that we go through these things and sometimes we don't even realize it because it's so automatic. So it's easy for people, especially when they're out of routine, to start doing other ways of coping, especially when there's not regular coping skills to use.
Yeah, that's such a good point that you bring up, right? As us as therapists, we often kind of just we think so much about this stuff for our clients. And so I think it's important for us to kind of flip that mirror at ourselves too and say, hey, what copings am I moving towards right now that maybe I either need to keep an eye on or just give myself grace for right now because it's a hard time.
Yeah. And that being said, one of the things that I think people can keep in mind for themselves or for their clients, especially people who maybe aren't normally high substance users, is just kind of the idea of harm reduction. And the idea of harm reduction is to have compassion on yourself about what you are choosing to do as a mechanism for coping, and also work at being mindful and intentional about reducing the amount of harm that is coming your way. And so if you're being mindful about, well, should I drink this bottle of wine tonight because I'm exhausted and I don't want to deal with thinking about work or COVID, or maybe anything else that's going on in your life, financial issues, or, is insurance going to actually pay us? Instead of like thinking I'm going to sit down with a bottle of wine, harm reduction would be like, well, I could do that, or I could have a glass of wine and stop at that, and be intentional about trying to minimize the amount of damage that you're doing to yourself and your body. Because the more you do something, it's like Pavlov's dog, you condition yourself into it. And so this could last for a while yet. And if you start drinking more and more every day, or, name your substance, then it's going to be a harder habit to break and could bleed into your regular life more and more, which you don't want. So does that kind of answer some of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm curious too about people. There's also many therapists and mental health providers that are in recovery, and so I'm thinking about those that are in a recovery. And I know that in many aftercare and recovery programs, that safety planning afterwards, there's that goal of limiting alone time, limiting being home by yourself. And so, what tips do you have for those who maybe use sober socializing as a part of staying in recovery or reducing harm, and now are unable to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think people in especially early recovery have been having a tough time with that, because we are in a time of a lot of isolation. It's really difficult for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, but I know that different communities have kind of online group forums, and some people have been kind of trying to find replacement things also, such as exercising, which is good for anything. And if you are not a sort of person that's into like the AA crowd or NA crowd or something on that order, there's other kinds of support groups out there that have like Zoom meetings or online forums, but it can be just as simple as having one person that is sort of like there for you, that can help, like in some ways hold accountable. It's not their job, but some ways hold accountable, that you can talk to, that you kind of have set up as sort of like a partner during this COVID time, as sort of like a backup plan to talk to over Zoom, or maybe it's a drive by and talk 6 feet apart in the driveway or apartment complex, parking lot, or whatever. I know some people are needing to get out and be active, and just for mental health wise, or if it's going to keep people from using or drinking too much, even going on a walk and doing the social distancing is probably helpful. Trying to find replacement behavior.
Yeah, so being creative.
Yeah, being creative.
Think outside the box a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you might, this might not be a popular view, but if it comes down to relapsing and having to be kind of near somebody, like it might be a decision you have to make.
Mm-hmm.
What's more safe over time.
Well, we're always looking at that in the medical community, right? Which is going to do the least harm. We look at that with medication side effects and other things as well. So
right.
I think what you're suggesting is just, what is the least amount of harm?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that around for me.
Yeah, Yes, because I don't think it's offensive. I think it's one of those things that we cope with all the time, but in isolation, we could hear it as offensive because we're being bombarded with, here's the science, social distance, here's the science, wear a mask, wash your hands, wear your gloves. And also we've got to look at that bigger picture in the medical community of what's the least amount of harm.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, many families are experiencing an increase in time together, so kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of what we were just talking about. And I know in addition to substance abuse, you also work a lot with anxiety and depression and OCD. And I'm wondering what words of wisdom you have for therapists or in general as we support our clients that maybe you have for spouses of partners who are struggling. So say they have a loved one that is depressed and, as a therapist, they've been dealing with that all day and maybe we're not as sensitive. Come on, guys, we're all guilty of this. We might not be as sensitive with our own loved ones. And so I'm just wondering, what maybe words of wisdom do you have for supporting those loved ones who are battling with mental health during the pandemic?
Are you meaning like loved ones of those of us who are therapists that have people that we are living with or cohabitating with that are having struggles right now, or therapists themselves?
Yes. When therapists loving others and caring for others, or even as we're supporting our clients, because I think this comes up a lot. So, I think these words of wisdom can also help us in our practices, but I think we're more talking to people that are trying to support someone who's depressed or anxious or having increased symptoms due to the pandemic. And what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, one thing that I can speak for myself personally that I've been working at doing is I almost don't dare say this because then somebody's going to catch me in it, but I've been trying to continuously remind myself that we're in like a system of trauma right now, just universally. And so people have different ways of coping with that and dealing with that. And so we're all on these different roller coasters at different times. And I've just been trying to remind myself, like if I have a negative reaction to somebody or if somebody has one towards me, and I'm doing this with my family as well, and I'm just reminding myself over and over and over again that we're all doing the best that we can. And we're all coping better at different times than other people. And we're all having negative reactions to certain things at different times when other people are coping well, And so it's, so I think for a blanket statement, that is something that I really, I would really love to see people working at that more, less judgment, more trying to understand that, well, I don't like how that person's coping. I'm just going to remind myself that this isn't going to last forever. And we're just trying to make it through this time period. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing to kind of remember too is like somebody you care about is going through something, you can't fix it for them. Mm-hmm. And I think even for therapists, sometimes we want to fix our loved ones, and where we might be very compassionate and do a lot of active listening, we might not have that kind of patience with our loved ones. And so it's sort of about reminding ourselves that we can only do so much. Like we can't control other people, and kind of again bringing it back to ourselves and how do I control this person right here? Mm-hmm. Because that's really all we can do. And in a way to be supportive to people who are going through things, you can just voice that you care about them, and you maybe don't know how to completely support them, but you're open to hearing from them about it. And then we just actually have to follow through like we do with our clients.
Yes. Say the serenity prayer, right?
Yeah. The other thing that I think, I've heard other people talking about this too, just even as a therapist, it's like, we give out so much compassion all day, and then and we talk about COVID all day with people that are really struggling with some of this, and so it's like we expend all this energy, and then the people that we really care about, that we want to listen to, it's hard sometimes, and I'm just saying that out loud. It's hard because I feel like I've already gone there about 8 times already today.
Yeah.
And so it's also just about having a little bit of self-compassion for, we're going through all of this as therapists too. And we're trying to hold everything for our clients and for our family members. And maybe we probably have the tendency not to save so much for ourselves. And so it is sort of reminding ourselves that we do have to be compassionate with ourselves, and we're not always going to have perfect reactions. Just kind of allowing ourselves that grace during this time, because we're also under a lot of stress.
Yeah. We're on the front lines, even if that's through a computer.
Right. And here's the other thing. Sometimes you just need to get away from people. And I saw this the other day, and I thought it was great. I was coming back from my office because I needed to get out of the house. I couldn't take it anymore. And I think my kids needed me to get out of the house too. I saw a woman in her minivan. I hope this woman finds out that I'm talking about this at some point. And she had her minivan parked in a parking lot. Nobody was in. She had her van towards the sun. So the sun was coming in on her face, and she was reading her book in her van. And I was like, that is a perfect example of getting creative when you really need some quiet alone time.
Yes. And sunshine
with you. And sometimes that's as simple as it can be, is you just got to leave. Sometimes you got to get out and find a way to do that that's safe.
Yeah, we need those breaks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and especially we don't have that commute time anymore. And I think having that space where even if you get in your car and go sit down the road and put the sunshine on your face and read a book that's not too mentally stimulating, but just for fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned how hard this is for you as a person. It's hard on all of us. I'm wondering what you've learned about yourself in this process as a healer, as you balance also being a human being impacted by living life during a pandemic.
Well, here's what I know about myself, is that I'm good in a crisis. And so once all this kind of calms down, it will probably hit me. You know what I mean? Because I'm busy in the mode of taking care of right now. So I've learned that, I don't know if I necessarily like that about myself, or that it's healthy or whatnot, but it is just part of the way I function. And I've learned that over the years. And so I'm just trying to let it be that way and try to be more aware of that. The other thing that I think I've learned is that, the positive part of this is being home. I don't really mind being home. Like I like being home a lot of the time, but I don't like having the freedom taken away from me. So I've been feeling very rebellious about that. My teenage rebellious self that I never was when I actually was a teenager has been coming up a lot.
So being able to find those things that are in your control, right? Rebelling while doing the least amount of harm.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to do that as therapists, do some of those creative little rebellions, right? That help us to kind of break out of the monotony of being in caretaker role and then moving into caretaker role as our, as mom or dad or husband or wife or partner, and being able to just be a human being, go and play a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think, one of the things that I always want to do with my kids is art projects. And I've said for years, I want to teach them how to do stained glass. And it's really hard to make the time to do that kind of a process. And so, this has afforded me that time to
Oh,
kind of get on
wonderful.
that. Yeah, so I'm really glad about that.
Beautiful. Well, now you'll have some beautiful stained glass in your home.
Yeah, or somebody will get some. Yeah.
Or gifts, right? Yes. All right. Well, Laura, before we wrap up, I was just wondering if you had any additional words of wisdom that you wanted to share with this community.
Sure. I think it's about being mindful, and there's one acronym in kind of like educational psychoeducation that we do for substance abuse, and it's HALT. Okay, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so before you do a behavior or before you do something impulsive, it's good to think about those things, because it seems so simple, but it really is true that if you're hungry, you're not coping as well. Angry is just the A is just, reminding you that you have emotions. And so what are your motivations behind what you're about to do? What are the feelings that you're experiencing, even the body feelings? Lonely, like people tend to comfort eat during times like this too, because we're lonely and we don't have our normal people to be with. um, and if you're lonely, then what could you maybe do about that, rather than drink more or eat a bunch of food that you're going to feel bad about later? And then tired. When people's routines are off, they end up usually getting less sleep rather than more. And some people are having a really hard time sleeping right now. And so like getting yourself in a good sleep routine is really important during a time like this, because if we aren't getting enough rest, our coping is just right off the bat going to struggle.
Yeah,
So,
that's so true. Halt. I love that. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much for coming on here and sharing all of your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope it's helpful.
I think it will be. All right. Well, this is Therapist Supporting Therapists. Please like and subscribe, and thank you, everybody.